Hello and welcome to School Talk. I'm John Wensky, Chair of the Shrewsbury School Committee, and today we're going to be talking about an important topic regarding media literacy and what we're teaching in our schools regarding media literacy. And I'm joined here by five friends today. My colleague on the school committee, Dr. Dale Magee. Also joining us today is our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum, Miss Amy Clouter. To my right, I have Director of Social Sciences, Jenn DiFrancesca. Hello. Also to my right, Liza Trombley, who's our Director of English. And then again to my left, I'm going a little around the horn here, but Director of Instructional Technology and Media Services, Shawna Powers. Welcome to you all today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, Dale, you had done a previous program specific to polarization in the media.
Right. Earlier this year, we did a program interviewing people from the mass media connection, and they are experts in electronic media and how it affects people, how they can better use it. And that interview kind of led to the logical question of how this is being addressed in the schools. The electronic media, the algorithms that are in place, all of the issues regarding how we get information today, I think add a dimension that wasn't there in my day. And I think that it's important for us to discuss.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different sources of information out there. And in my day, in terms of in the mid-'80s, you watch the news at 6 o'clock and 6:30 on CBS, NBC, or ABC. And then you had the evolution of cable news, which led to the evolution of the internet. And then basically anybody and everyone has a forum for providing information to people. So I think it's an interesting topic to kind of start, within the schools. How do you educate around reliable sources and doing your due diligence to do that research? Not sure who wants to start.
I can start.
Yeah, sure.
So in the English department, what we like to stress is media is created by somebody, and that somebody has a purpose.
Right.
And you're never going to find media that's completely unbiased. So you have to identify the bias. You're not going to avoid it, but you have to know what it is. So when we talk about different sources, we talk about really drilling down and understanding who the author is and what their intent is. When we go down to the media center and we talk to Ms. Bredberg in the media center, she says the same thing, like it's biased.
Right.
Know that. Acknowledge it. It means somebody's voice isn't being heard. Know what voice isn't being heard, so that then you can do more research to hear that person's voice, so that you're getting all the different viewpoints.
Sure.
So this is key. I think you're not only letting people know that almost all information is biased in some way, but also that they really should be looking for the other side.
Right.
That they're not fully informed until they do, regardless of what their particular biases are.
Absolutely. And we talk about, when you're talking about algorithms, and I can't speak to that, but when we talk about like how social media works and how it's smart. So it knows what you want to hear and it knows what you want to see, and then it keeps giving you that. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about that in our classrooms. I can't go into the science of how that all works, but we talk about being aware of that, and being aware how when you search for something, you keep hearing it over and over again. And so really I want kids to leave Shrewsbury High School and be smart about that, because they're not going to avoid it. Right. So I want them to be aware of it.
Absolutely. And these are things that our young kids can learn today, as opposed to like adults here that have just adopted the technology over time, and maybe not aware of the algorithms that are driving this information to the top of your news feed, which is interesting. Also, the presentation of some of this material looks very authentic in some cases. The production quality, the headlines, and oftentimes based on what you're liking, whether it be on Twitter or Facebook, you'll see similar topics kind of rise to the top of the feed. It's just interesting, within a school setting, to have to manage through all of these different sources. So.
Yeah, I think in a related term, when we talk about adult learners, as we focused on diversity and equity and inclusion, we've looked at identity and how identity and bias are related. So one of the things science tells us is that we're pretty good at recognizing bias in other people, but we're really bad at recognizing our own bias. So having some protocols where we examine and hold ourselves accountable for that is really important, because I think when we look at communication in general, even before we get to the algorithms, we think about email. Yeah. It's very hard to read the tone of an email. If I get an email from Liza and I think, oh, that was a little abrupt, I know Liza, she wouldn't mean it that way. But if I'm looking at the same email, the exact same text from somebody I don't know, I go right up the ladder of inference. And I think if you add that to social media, where you're alone in your home, sometimes you're anonymous, sometimes you're only getting some perspectives that are reinforcing your own, then it becomes a real difficult situation to kind of think about, okay, wait a minute, is this realistic? Is this fair? So I think increasingly we're helping adults to recognize the other part of the equation is mentioning to students, especially when you're emotionally engaged or you're bombarded with a visual or you're pressured to make a quick decision, it's probably not going to be a great decision. So how do we introduce slow thinking as well, and kind of counter some of the messaging that we're all bombarded with as long as we have a phone?
That's, there's a key piece there, and that is when you're communicating with someone face to face, you're constantly getting feedback. You can see their emotions, you can see their intentions, you hear the tone in their voice, all of which isn't there in that email. And so you tend to fill in the blanks yourself, and you can fill them in wrong.
Often you do.
I think in social sciences we do a similar thing to what is happening in English, and to what Amy just mentioned is we try to have kids look at like historical documents and images and paintings and political cartoons and think about in the same way, like what are you seeing in this image, what are you not seeing in this image, or kind of what are your observations and takeaways, and then helping them think about same thing, that back in the past, things that we think are true, this is just the way it is that there are things that we should learn and ask questions about from the past, and then applying those same skills to current media, so that the media of the past, I know we constantly are saying things like the newspapers in the 1800s are like the social media of today, or these salons where they met in revolutionary France to talk about all of these ideas, that's similar to kind of the chat rooms that people have today to talk about different issues. And so thinking about when we're reading the documentation of those events, what kind of questions would we ask about those and their perspectives and their biases? So then how can we apply those skills when we're looking at current media and information?
Right. Yeah, definitely. And in terms of how people are consuming media within the school, right? I mean, are there certain applications that they're being exposed to that maybe help them, with critical thinking?
So when we do formal research, we try to drive them to databases, which kids hate, because it's not familiar to them.
Right.
But we do push them to look at databases, to look at just all of the resources that we have available, and then try to help them understand that when you're not looking at that, you really have to know what you are looking at. So kids' first question always is, can I use Wikipedia? I say, Wikipedia is not a source. Wikipedia is like a starting place. You can, of course, look at it. I think that when I think back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was teaching, and kids would ask those questions, and like the immediate response would be like, no, don't look at that. And I think over time we've learned that's just foolish, because they're looking at everything. And so instead of trying to control what they're looking at, trying to help them look at it with a critical lens is much more important than trying to steer them away from things, because as soon as you try to steer them away from things, those are the most tempting things to look at.
Exactly.
And at the high school level, I mean, we're dealing with young adults.
Right.
Obviously that's going to be different at the younger grades.
This brings up an interesting question, and that is, how realistic is it for parents to monitor or control the access their children have? We often hear limit screen time, track where they're going or what they're saying on social media and things like that. And I've often wondered how realistic that is. What are your thoughts on that?
Personally, I think it's like anything in parenting or in the classroom where you want to start off a little stricter than maybe you intend to ultimately be, because once you open up the doorway for them, it's hard to pull back. So I personally, my advice to parents of young children would be to hold off on giving them a phone as long as they can. And when you do give them a phone, restrict it. It's pretty easy to go ahead and set a screen time limit on your child's phone, or limit what kinds of content that they can access, limit the times of day when they can use the phone. And when you do that, let's say you set a 2-hour screen time limit. At the 2-hour mark, the child is no longer able to do anything on their phone if that's how you set it. So that's what I would recommend as a starting point, to start off. I think a lot of parents feel pressured to give their kids phones so they can be in contact with them. I think that's usually the starting point. I know it was for me. But so you can treat a phone as opposed to a small computer in your pocket when you first give it to them. And for me, I think it would meet the need of being able to know where they are and be able to communicate with them either over text or FaceTime or a phone call without putting the internet in their back pocket before you're ready to manage that.
Is there research regarding anxiety and depression and screen time?
Yes. It speaks to the quality of the screen time. So there are overall limits about work-life balance that pertain to screen time for kids just as much as they do for adults. And it's not good to be on screen time or playing video games and compromise your sleep. But also the screen time you spend on a video game is not the same as the screen time you might spend researching or reading something on a Kindle. So not all screen time is alike. But I think one of the things that I didn't have to struggle with as a parent, because when I was lobbied to get a phone for my oldest, it was a flip phone, and it was truly a phone. But I was very aware, bringing my kids to the musical at the high school this past weekend, that my older niece has a phone that has access to the internet. She could scan the QR code and see the program. My younger niece does not have that same privilege by design. And I appreciated kind of the nuances that my brother and his wife are negotiating as being different, because they're two different ages. And one of them who can kind of handle or has had deep conversations about, where are you going online and what are you seeing there, versus the younger student who doesn't. And there's a lot of pressure to have that phone, right? Because it's not just a communication device, it's also kind of a marker of growing up. Increasingly, it's a status symbol. And so, and for some kids also, very importantly, it's a security blanket. And I know my daughter wanted to have it to be able to reach me, or because when she was walking home, she felt better knowing that she could call me if she needed me. But increasingly, I think kids are logging in because that's where some of their friends are, and they feel that security and that connection on their phone. And we're trying to have kids feel a sense of connection at school. And so they're less driven to get that online, and more driven to interact with kids when they're in person, playing at recess, outside on the playground, or in school activities after school at the high school, and engaging in speech and debate, or writing a newspaper, or whatever it might be. But that's a hard sell, because they have lives in both places now. And I think making kids aware of how they're striking that balance is something that, when I was a student in high school, I didn't have to negotiate that. Right? It's really hard for adolescents to negotiate that. But I think it can be really difficult for them to strike that balance in a way that's healthy all the time.
Well, the screens also, especially the phones, you just touch something and you get some instant feedback, some little mystery gift that just it draws you in. It just takes a second.
Yeah, and with the algorithms, as we talked about, a lot of that is hidden from view, right? You don't know it's happening. So your phone, in some cases, knows what you like, knows the information that you want to see, and pushes you notifications that are maybe notifications that you agree with, But, I think there's also a good point on screen time and the tools that are out there to limit it. But, the less you limit it early on, the harder it is, as you said, to kind of pull back from it. And I think over the last 2 years, certainly there's been such a dependency on screens, right? I mean, whether it was being, fully remote for schooling, or hybrid, where you had to kind of split your time, and now we're back into what we would call maybe post-COVID normal times, I guess. But it's, knock on wood, exactly. So I think, I'm sure you're experiencing that challenge now, coming back into kind of normalcy, where you have to rebuild those social skills. We were talking a lot about that, yesterday at the school committee. So what are the types of challenges that you're seeing kind of as you return back into full in-person learning?
I think, when we were talking about this earlier, one of the pre-COVID things we were working on in the social sciences was having students practice those online discussion skills. Like, how do you engage in civil discourse online? Like, how do you present yourself in Schoology? There's a way where we can have like a closed discussion, so it's only the students in the class, or maybe you merge with another class, so it's, and you can practice, okay, I don't see you in class, and we can have a discussion. And in some ways last year, when we were split, you could have those discussions because they didn't see the other half of the class, and so it was kind of like having a conversation with someone you didn't know. I will say one of the big things we're doing this year that's different is we're really not focusing on the online discussions and really much more trying to have kids practice this, because I feel like that's a skill that they are missing. So I know you said earlier about they're reading all of these cues, and I feel like they need a lot of practice to improve their ability to read those cues, and so we're spending a lot more time, okay, here's a topic, let's have a discussion around what do you think about this question, maybe think about it yourself, and then like share your thoughts to your group, and then let's talk about it as a class, and then go back to your group, and really kind of in a very structured way almost, because they need that practice about how do we have a disagreement, how can I share my viewpoint, but we don't have to come to consensus, we just have to share our viewpoints and listen to each other. So in some ways, I feel like we've backed away from how do you do the online discussion, because we feel like that face-to-face is so important.
Absolutely.
I know it was really affirming to hear from Thought Exchange, which feels like ancient history now, but when we engaged kids about homework online, and how struck the Thought Exchange people were by the level of civility in the discussions that our students exhibited. So I think backing away from that now, especially as we're welcoming kids back to school, and encouraging them to do more of that is important. I think at the younger grades that looks like giving kids sentence stems for managing disagreement, because you want students to be able to get along with each other, but also you do want them to feel like they can say, no, I don't agree with you, that it is okay to disagree, but it's not okay if you're not disagreeing in a way that's respectful. So how do we disagree respectfully? And kids need more direct help with that, or even effective listening. I hear you saying that is that how you really feel about that, or how many people feel about that? Like it's okay for kids to invite different perspectives and be able to share their own, even if they're the only person with that opinion. And we also spend a lot of time talking about fact versus opinion. How do we know when something's an opinion? How do we know that it's a fact? And both things are okay, but they're very different.
Definitely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm curious also on your perspective. So my son, when he was in 5th, 6th grade, was a one-to-one iPad program in its infancy. And one of the things I remember on the back of his iPad was kind of the best practices for becoming a responsible digital citizen. I remember thinking to myself, what is a digital citizen, right? As an adult, I didn't know, but I've come to really appreciate that level of kind of guidance on how to engage with your friends online, whether it's through texting or messaging. But I'm curious, just maybe to give our audience a little bit of perspective, how do you explain that to students who are new to the iPad program and the impact that their digital footprint could have on their future?
We do start teaching digital citizenship lessons in kindergarten now that we have the one-to-one iPad program beginning at kindergarten. Students at the elementary level are getting those lessons regularly in their media classes, and their classroom teachers are following up with the material as it's appropriate in the classroom. So they're getting it from lots of different teachers from lots of different ways. Of course, when you're starting off in kindergarten, the way you're going to teach concepts like media balance or privacy is going to be different than what you're going to teach at the high school level, but the concepts are, still the same. So yes, students are, it's one benefit essentially of us having the one-to-one program at that level is that we brought those lessons down. So historically, we taught those lessons at the grade levels where we were using iPads regularly. So, when you're talking about your son being in 5th grade, that was where we started really teaching those lessons. And then when we started doing more iPad work with 4th grade, we started having a regimented approach to teaching digital citizenship in 4th grade, and then we brought them to 3rd grade with just iPads in the classroom, not that they were going home. And then, of course, COVID, and all of a sudden, we became one-to-one K-4. So now it's really important to make sure that we're being proactive and, engaging kids in those conversations as early as we possibly can.
Definitely. Yeah, no, it's important for everyone to understand the impact of the digital footprint, and what you post, what you share, can be searchable unless you do your due diligence to
Doesn't
go into
go away.
No.
exactly.
That's
Doesn't
actually
go away.
a really interesting thing to do with students, especially
Right.
well, high school and middle school students. Have them Google themselves.
Yes.
If you just put your name in quotes in Shrewsbury MA,
Right.
what comes up? Well, if that's what you see, that's what others are going to see if they look you up. And when you apply for jobs, people do that. So I think those are important things to be letting them see. When I've done it with students, they're usually surprised just that how easy it is to just Google themselves and find information on them.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly, even comments on social media or videos that are shared on YouTube, they're all searchable. And I know there's settings that, if you're savvy enough, you can go in and maybe protect that information, but it only goes so far, right? And I've certainly done that exercise many times when you Google search just to see what comes up, So, other challenges that you experience in the school in terms of just media literacy related topics, just things that you've noticed over the last, actually, the current school year.
I think you touched on it a little bit earlier. It's how quickly things change and how things look authentic that aren't.
Oh, yes.
I can remember a decade ago saying to kids, like, if something's got an ad on it, it's probably not a reputable source. Now everything has an ad on it, reputable sources too.
Exactly.
So it's just harder and harder to discern, and people with bad intentions are savvy. They're really savvy, and they can make things look really real, very authentic that aren't. And I think students, even seniors in high school, have a hard time discerning that kind of right off the bat in a way that, certainly 10, 15 years ago, you could pretty much tell just with an eyeball what was real and what was not. And I think that's a real struggle, and it gets harder all the time. And of course, there are more and more systems out there that are designed to trick you, to give you disinformation and misinformation, and that's hard for kids to understand.
We do an activity with our students in the Student Innovation Team class where it's like spot the troll, and we show them different social media accounts, and they're trying to figure out which ones are real and which ones are like bots, and it's really hard to tell. Ultimately, the criteria is usually that the fake accounts are all focused on one particular, political view or something like that. There's no like personal information. There's no like pictures of the family or things like that. It's very specific. But even I didn't pick up on that at first. It took me after going through the correct answers to see, oh, okay, I can see that now. That is very pointed and very focused on one issue. But it's hard to tell.
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard of that game called Spot the Troll. I was thinking about like Where's Waldo back in the day, and now Spot the Troll. That sounds like a tougher game.
It's tough.
Do you have a comment on that?
No, I was just thinking that I think some of, and you alluded to this earlier, like the instant feedback, that when we're trying to have them, students, I love history. I know you love history, but sometimes reading a historical document, there's not going to be like a prize popping up at you. It's hard work, and it takes time, and you have to read it several times and try to process it. And sometimes I think sometimes it's really amazing, as always, when they get really hooked by something and really engaged. But I think especially at the beginning of this year, that work felt a lot harder to get kids to kind of sit and be okay with not getting it right away, not getting that instantaneous feedback about I read this and I understand it and I'm good and I'm done. That being okay with it's going to take me a while to understand this and process it. And I just think that's a function of our time. I don't think that's just unique to students. But I think that's a challenge that we face.
Well, one distraction that you hinted at earlier is the idea of the notifications popping up all the time. And I think the lesson there is that there's probably a lot of value to turning off all notifications and eliminating that distraction as much as you can. That's another concrete thing that you might be able to consider doing.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, even for myself, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, just going through my Facebook feed and removing all news sources, and because at times it was so chaotic that I just wanted to see things that maybe I had a hobby for, maybe it was music or, concerts or something like that. And I just wanted to see that in my feed, and I didn't want to see, any negativity, just, certain posts from, certain friends or whatever. So it is hard, and I agree with what you're saying, Liza, that you can see things that look so authentic, that have a great presentation, great graphics. It looks official. And anytime either my son or daughter asks me about a certain topic, my first question to them is, "Where did you read that? What was the web address? Who's presenting it?" Because not just on the internet, but even streaming services have a variety of programs that look really authentic and that agree with various perspectives. And that's among some of the challenges that I'm sure, in the schools that we're all facing.
And I think,
With teenagers, my own in particular, I noticed that sometimes my daughter will say something as though it's a fact. And I'll be like, "Where'd you see that TikTok?" And she's like, "Yeah, I know it's probably not true, but when she says it at first, she frames it like it's true."
Right.
And so it's really disturbing, but also interesting to think, like, what is it like to be 16, to be 18, and to be trying to process all this information. I actually think they're doing remarkably well.
Yeah.
When I think about when I was that age, I'm actually so grateful that I did not have this constant influx of information the way they do.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the bigger challenges, is just the speed at which we live our lives. And as aware as we all are, we still get occasional emails from Brian that say, you might have something in your inbox that looks like this. Don't click on it.
Yeah.
And somebody else always ends up confessing and saying, "I'm so sorry.
I did it.
I did it." And because we're doing a lot of things simultaneously, and so we think when we're multitasking we're really efficient, and I think kids are subject to that same thing. And I think you can open up your phone and think you're going to watch one thing that somebody sent you, right? But it's really programmed to give you the next link, and then the next thing you've watched 3 TED Talks, and really you've wasted an hour instead of 20 minutes. I think the same thing happens to kids, but with TikTok or other distractions. And parents may or may not be in the know about what the latest thing is.
Right. Exactly. Well, yeah, we could keep talking about this for an hour. Maybe we'll do another show on this. I think this was really a great topic. Appreciate your participation today. And thank you all for watching School Talk.